We are live with Alexander McCurris in London. And with us today, we are very happy to have on the show once again the fantastic Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Mr. Sachs, how are you doing today?
Great to be with you guys, as always, and amazing times. Absolutely amazing times.
Yep, and we are going to get right into it. So a quick hello to everyone that is watching us. A big shout out to our fantastic moderators. Alexander, Professor Sachs, we have quite a lot of news to discuss. By the way, I have all of Professor Sachs' information in the description box down below, and I will add it as a pinned comment as well, so you can follow all of his amazing work. So Alexander, Professor Sachs, let's talk about all the events of the past couple of days.
Indeed, absolutely momentous events, and hopefully eventually consequential events as well, because we are now seeing finally a dialogue between the American and Russian superpowers, something we haven't seen for 3 years. Very dangerous situation when that doesn't happen. Professor Sachs has been in program after program that we've done with him in many, many places. He has been pointing out what an incredibly dangerous thing that is. He's been advising, to the extent one could give advice, the Biden administration, President Biden himself, that it was his duty to pick up the telephone and speak to the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, whatever feelings the two might have about each other. The responsibility the American and Russian presidents carry is so great that it is absolutely unacceptable for us to have a situation where they don't talk. Well, that has now happened. The President of the United States, the new President, Donald Trump, has spoken over the telephone with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. There has been a meeting in Riyadh. Apparently, the meeting went well. There have been discussions on many topics, not just the conflict in Ukraine. And I have to say, to my own incredulity, I mean, in spite of everything, I am still astonished. The leaders of Europe, many people in the United States, so-called respectable opinion in many parts of the Western world, instead of being relieved that finally we have a dialogue going and moves towards some kind of settlement of the outstanding conflicts and perhaps a return to arms control. Putin touched on that in a press conference he gave yesterday. Instead of being happy about that, they are furious. They're organizing counter summits. They're making criticisms. But I mustn't speak too much because we only have Professor Sachs. We're privileged to have Professor Sachs for only a relatively short time. So I'm going to hand over directly to you, Professor Sachs, and just, I think, firstly, your thoughts about where we are, but also if you could say something about this extraordinary reaction that we are now seeing.
Thanks a lot. You know, we should always be cautious and careful when we're analyzing these events. But I have to say, I hope I'm not just getting swept up in it. It seems pretty momentous, what's happening right now. It seems more than the news cycle or the spin cycle. I've always believed, I've said for years and years and years and years, and the years are now quite long, that there are no fundamental conflicts between the United States and Russia. I'll say the same, that there are no fundamental conflicts between the United States and China. It seems that President Trump is pursuing that approach, which would mark a dramatic change of American foreign policy, a fundamental change, I would say, that is a break with the last 33 years. 33 years. Why? Because when the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, the neocons, the believers in the United States, in the unipolar world that America and its unique military, financial, economic, technological power in their minds meant that the United States ran the world. What has happened in the last few days is President Trump has respectfully spoken with President Putin and said the United States does not aim to run the world or to damage Russia's security. The United States government has acknowledged that NATO will not expand to Ukraine and to Georgia, which was part of a 30-year game played by the United States, a very dangerous and violent game. And more than that, it was not only picking up the phone or having a discussion or having a meeting in Riyadh, but actually a rather impressive, it seems, move to normal relations, a restoration of economic relations, as you said, a new chapter, we hope and pray, for a stability of the nuclear arms framework. President Trump made remarkable statements, brief statements, but remarkable statements about three-way negotiations of Russia, China, and the United States to reduce nuclear arms, to avoid an extraordinarily dangerous and costly, quote, modernization of nuclear arsenals. And then yesterday, our Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, called for deep, and according to the headline numbers, truly deep cuts in the U.S. military. This has not happened for decades. And immediately, our congressmen and senators jumped up and down because they're on the payrolls of, or they're funded in their campaigns, or their families are funded by the military-industrial complex in the United States. So these are all extraordinary statements. There was another extraordinary statement by President Putin's spokesperson, Mr. Peskov, who said, our concern is not about Ukraine joining the European Union. Our concern is about military, security, NATO. This is quite different. Extraordinary, such a statement. So clear, of course, extraordinary in the context that it's so rational. I've always believed that. I've always said that Europe's greatest mistake was to co-locate NATO and the European Union in the same city. Almost an accident, by the way, when NATO headquarters left Paris. Shouldn't have gone to Brussels, but increasingly, NATO and the EU became the same thing, to Europe's devastating consequence, because Europe lost its foreign policy, lost its autonomy, lost its sense, lost its voice, doesn't understand what's going on. And when you ask me, I'm here in Brussels, I was at the European Parliament yesterday. There is so much confusion in Europe because it's been years and years and years in which Europe simply gave away its foreign policy. So they don't have diplomacy. They don't know how to have diplomacy because they're so rusty at it. I've been saying to European leaders for years, go to Moscow, talk. You're on the same continent. You're neighbors. What are you doing? But they don't. They warmonger. Now, yesterday, interestingly, in the Parliament, I can't speak for more than those that I met, and it was a peace group that hosted the meeting. But there were many members of many of the political groups at this talk that I gave. Something will change even in Europe. Of course, they're completely bewildered because van der Leyen and Kallas and everybody else in the European leadership staked everything on a militarist, confrontational, US-led, Biden-esque, deep state US approach, and it's gone suddenly. And so they're all out there without any scaffolding, without any sense, without any direction. They don't know what they're doing, but they are realizing something different needs to be done. And Europe is one of the huge, complete puzzles in all of this. Europe is, it's 450 million people. It's got an economy in purchasing power terms of about $30 trillion. This is a big, important place without a foreign policy. It's rather amazing.
Absolutely. And I think a point that was being made, I think Putin made it actually, was that, they're complaining about being excluded. Nothing prevents them picking up the phone and calling Putin as well. Nothing prevents them appointing their own high representative if they wish and sending that person to Moscow. I think there's a Russian, I think it was Putin, actually said that. And the same, by the way, applies to Ukraine. They are complaining that they are excluded from the negotiations. But again, I think it was the point that was made, and I think it was again Putin, that these are ultimately American-Russian negotiations. A lot of them concern bilateral matters between the United States and Russia. If the Ukrainians, like the Europeans, want to be involved, it's very easy. They appoint a negotiator and send that person to Moscow. It's not difficult. In fact, it's what used to always happen. Adenauer, who was very anti-Russian and very anti-communist, went to Moscow. They all once did. Margaret Thatcher went to Moscow. She was the Iron Lady and all of that. It's not difficult to understand.
And Putin, of course, came to Europe. And, it was a mutual relationship. And for years, a mutually fruitful relationship in the 1990s that the United States went out of its way to break. And Europe let itself be broken by the US. This is the tragedy. Germany and Russia are absolutely complementary economies. Russia, with its combination of technology and incredible engineering sophistication and vast natural resources, and Germany with its industrial base, fit together economically. It's an incredible combination. The United States hated that idea, the deep state. So one of the subtexts of the last 30 years was not only US hegemony, but also make sure that there isn't a close German-Russian relationship. And that's, of course, the essence of the US opposition to Nord Stream and to natural economic trade between Europe and Russia. And the United States broke it. And the Europeans basically worked for the United States during that period against the interests of Europe. Now they're recognizing, my God, what are we supposed to, they're not quite recognizing, they're shell-shocked. They're completely bewildered of what's happening. What's happening is very sensible, which is we're pulling back from the brink of World War III. This is great news. There's no question about it, that it's great news. And as you say, they can't even figure out that it's good news. This is amazing.
Absolutely. This is absolutely. Now, there's something I wanted to discuss, which never gets talked about, but it was apparently a big topic of the discussions in Riyadh, which is American-Russian economic ties as well. Now, these are two big economies. Of course, the United States is a huge economy. Russia's not a small economy, contrary to what many people think. There's been much talk many times, and I remember back in the 70s, there was talk about establishing good, strong economic relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, as it then was. It never happened. Always there was opposition and obstruction and attempts to prevent it happening. And I've always felt myself that one of the reasons why the political relations between the United States and Russia never really came together was that they were never underpinned by an economic relationship. Anyway, they were talking about that in Riyadh. And it's interesting that one of the people the Russians sent was a man called Kirill Dmitriev, whom I believe you know, by the way, I think you've met him, who is the head of Russia's direct investment fund, and said, we can offer you this and that, you can do all of these things with us. And apparently the Americans were very interested. They listened and they heard and they said, yes, this could actually work. Can you say something about this? Because this is something you have knowledge
of. Yes, I go back on this issue 30, 5 years, at the request of President Gorbachev's economic team, I tried to bring the US and the Soviet Union together in 1990, 1991. My idea was that the United States at that time would help with financial stabilization, provide some grants and loans so that the Soviet Union could carry out its political and industrial and economic reforms. It was the idea that I had was rejected completely by the White House, and I didn't understand that that was the neocon moment taking hold. Recently, it was fascinating for me. I read the minutes of the National Security Council meeting dissing my idea, and I never read them before. It was somebody sent them from the archives. They've just been opened up. And the Americans were completely stupid and obnoxious. One of them was a former colleague of mine at Harvard, completely obnoxious. What they say in the meeting is, we have to do the minimum. We're not going to help on anything. We're no vision, just US nastiness. Well, I experienced it, but I hadn't read the minutes of the actual meeting when, when this approach was decided. In the 1990s, basically the American view was, Russia's nothing except we can grab the natural resources. I hated it. Of course, I tried to help with President Yeltsin raise funding again, turned down flat because the Americans had a completely different idea, which was unipolarity and grab natural resources where you can. Russia is a very sophisticated economy filled with very sophisticated people and well-trained engineers. And by the way, as the world's largest land area with vast natural resources, the population is modest by big power standards at 150 million people, but we're entering an age where the number of people is not really decisive. There are going to be humanoid robots and AI systems and many other things. This incredible land area, the vast resources, the northern route, the Arctic route, something that is obviously on President Trump's mind, means that Russia is a great power, no question, for generations to come, and one that will play in increasing significance in the world economy. And this is partly what was discussed in Riyadh. I also found it extremely important. Now, it's tantalizing, it doesn't prove anything, but it's a glimmer of hope. Here the two are meeting in Riyadh. Now, Saudi Arabia is absolutely the linchpin of achieving peace in the Middle East. And there they are at the invitation of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And I believe, I'm guessing, that they spoke about Israel and Palestine. Just as peace will come to Ukraine now, peace could come to the Middle East, basically with the one change of vote by the United States. A vote for a Palestinian state as the 194th member of the UN. And then there will be normalization of relations with Israel by Saudi Arabia, by actually all 57 countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. We're tantalizingly close to a breakthrough for peace. Again, whether Donald Trump can break the iron grip of the Israel lobby in the United States, which has done so much profound damage to American politics and to the Middle East and to world peace and risks, I don't know. But he's broken the iron grip of the deep state neocon project, and maybe he can break the iron grip of the Israel lobby the same way.